Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Subscribing to My Podcast. Because I have a new guest featured every week, it makes it very difficult to maintain consistent viewership. So if there's one thing that you can do to support me or the guest featured on the show, it's by interacting with my channel in every way that you can. You can always decide to unsubscribe later if you decide that you hate me or my show. With that plugging aside, enjoy my discussion with the people who are listening right now. The origin of this is that I had released a clip from my discussion, my three-way discussion about abortion. And then Chris commented, somewhat disagreeing with the position that Jackson held, like the guest on the show at that time, but one that I hold pretty similarly as well. And so him and I kind of, went back and forth, and then he kind of challenged me to a debate in the comment section, and then we emailed, and now we're here meeting for the first time, and then we're gonna, I guess, debate about abortion. So, but I guess I'll start. What I'll say preliminarily is that I would like to stay away from, I guess, maybe what we talked about in the comments. I don't think that I had misrepresented myself in the comments or anything like that, but I wouldn't want you to like pin me, be like, well, you said this. I'll just restate, what I think.
We can start fresh. Like, I would be open to starting fresh, or just however you want to do it. Then we can obviously question our view more in detail, and things like that. I'm totally fine with that.
Okay, cool. I guess what I'll do then is I will just tell you my view and what's applicable, and then you can start poking holes, and then that'll probably lead to whatever conversation ends up happening. So, so my particular view is that I would say I'm pro-choice, and I would say that I am pro-choice up until about 20 weeks, because at 20 weeks, we develop a capacity to deploy a conscious experience. I would say that there's a distinction between being a human and then being a person, and that life starts at conception, but that might not be when we grant things rights. That might not be when we grant them personhood. There might be other qualities that we value. One of the examples that I point to point at this distinction is that there might be a brain dead person who we know will be brain dead forever. We are allowed to end that life, pull the plug, kill that person, both morally and legally speaking. However, that person is just as alive as the fetus is before 20 weeks. However, we're able to kill that person. I would say we're able to kill that person because they will never be allowed to deploy that conscious experience again. Now, when you take it back to the fetus, before 20 weeks, before it has any of the parts to be able to deploy that conscious experience, I would say it is equivalent to a dead body. It will get the parts to deploy that conscious experience, but right now there is no ability to deploy a conscious experience, so there's no harm being experienced by anything, by the fetus. It would be like killing a tree at that point, because there's no conscious experience that is able to experience the fact that it's being harmed. There will be, but I do think that there's a distinction between it having a conscious experience and then it being able to develop that ability to have a conscious experience, if that makes sense. I would say that's the bulk of my thoughts. I have a lot of other thoughts too, but I would say that's like the bulk of my position.
Okay. Would you want me to? So, if I can ask a question, well, it's kind of like a statement. The issue that I have with the whole personhood position is it's very subjective, right? With personhood is because you do admit that there is we can say a biological human, where the issue I have with personhood is we slowly give these human beings value based off the traits that they develop, right? This can go from, I think, like Peter Singer's view of what a person is, which is even way after birth. I think David Bonin, I could be saying his name wrong, but like these philosophers, and I think the philosophy is so subjective of when we give these human beings, let's say, a human right. And I know that can be also like a whole discussion, right? But where we're able to kill these humans based off a subjective view. And I think that's my issue with the whole personhood claim, because it can be broad. Now, when you say consciousness, what within consciousness gives a human's worth or moral consideration? And if I have it correct, you don't give before consciousness sentience, however you want to classify it, that's when you give this human moral consideration. Without consciousness, they don't have moral consideration. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I would say, I guess to get a little bit more meta ethical, the conversation is very particularly about abortion. I would talk about like rights. That's slightly different.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring it up like that is because I look at it as a pros and cons list. So what are all the pros of having an abortion? What are all the cons of having an abortion? In the cons section, there is something wrong about having an abortion before 20 weeks. There's something bad about ending a life, even if it's not conscious, any of that. There is something bad. My thing is that that's not even close to worse than the like permanent body damages of pregnancy, the financial cost of all these things. So when I'm talking about rights and value, I agree that a fetus before 20 weeks has value. And I would even agree that it has rights to a certain extent. I just don't think those come. The reason why I say personhood is because that's important when establishing what are the harms happening when an abortion happens. So because there's nothing there to experience any of the harms, that severely diminishes how bad an abortion is. And now the pros of an abortion start to outweigh it, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't say that like a fetus has no rights or no value or anything like that. But when it's in the abortion conversation, the values start to compare to each other, and it gets a little bit more nuanced.
Okay, so on when the human gains, I know I keep saying sentience, but
I won't challenge you on it unless it's a problem. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. So sentience, consciousness, wherever terms I think we can intertwine together, that's completely fine with me. But when, let's say that human gains that consciousness, now, do you believe that after that state of development of this human, that they have moral consideration in the sense of the woman cannot have an abortion? Where essentially, I would ask, would you force her or make laws where she has to stay pregnant and then give birth, let's say at 38 weeks, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I would say any abortion after 20 weeks when that capacity for consciousness has developed is murder. It is the same as murdering a baby, or we should morally value it as such. So I would have like a hard cutoff, because now the cons of having an abortion severely outweigh the pros of having an abortion, because murder is very, very rarely justified. I guess murder technically is the unjustified killing of something, but I hope you grasp what I'm saying. Like now it's definitely way worse to have an abortion than to not.
Okay, so I think it would go back to where when you say murder, what would make that murder exactly? Just because that human was unjustly killed? Because essentially would say someone who takes the bodily autonomy position, right? They can say even if that is a person, they don't have a right to reside in me and use my body still and all my resources. So would you still say you would force her in a sense, or believe in law should say she cannot have an abortion? Because I fully say that, and I would say I do, but that's at conception on. So I would say that unless the justification would be that her unborn is killing her, and that's the only position I would say that I take, where it would justify the right to defend your life from being killed.
Yeah, I would say after 20 weeks, it's definitely murder. And that word murder kind of describes a little more than I would like it to. But I would just say that after 20 weeks, it causes significantly more harms to have an abortion than it would be pros to have an abortion, because there is now something there to experience, one, just like literal death, so like the pain of being killed, but also there is something there who is losing its consciousness permanently because of your actions. So like there are now harms experienced by the fetus at 20 weeks. So now that something is being harmed, that now it's bad at 20 weeks. So after that, I wouldn't be okay with abortion after 20 weeks.
Okay, because I would maybe I can like my insight, like well, my whole you can say definition of harm, especially in the case of abortion, would be you're depriving this human their I know I don't want to throw this in their right to life, or you're depriving them of their future, where it would be unjust. Because again, I believe you can justly kill someone or anyone, but if the reason's sufficient. So when I say harm for like my position, I would say you're depriving this human their life, which is harmful. And I would even go further and say you can still be harmed without feeling pain, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess that would maybe be where I wouldn't say that it's just feeling pain. Like I said, it would be this capacity for consciousness, but for me, it wouldn't be unjust killing because there's nothing there to kill. I hate this terminology because it kind of presupposes the point, but it's just a clump of cells. Like there's nothing there. There will be something there. There will be something that no longer has a life, but there's not a current thing to be taking its life from, if that makes sense, because there's nothing there to experience its life being taken away from it. Now, again, I would say that preventing somebody's life from ever existing willingly isn't a good thing. I would say that it's bad, but I would say that it's not worse than the benefits that you could have from having an abortion, is what I would say.
So what would be the benefits of like of having an abortion before, let's say, the sentence, their sentience development or the consciousness? Like, because I would say the benefits can also be beneficial even after that person exists within the womb. Like, for example, like school, right? Or financial hardships. The There can be a lot of benefits. I know it's case by case, but I don't think the woman you can say benefiting. I would have to I give pushback because I don't think that's a just reason. It would have. That's why I'm curious on what you mean by benefit.
Yeah, I guess I would be referring to like the prevented 9 months of permanent body changes from pregnancy. Obviously, the uncomfortability and pain of being pregnant, also the hospital bills, the cost of childcare, the cost of putting it up for adoption, stuff like that, especially when you're having an abortion in like 5 weeks or something, something like exceptionally early. I mean, you could circumvent all of the negative consequences of being pregnant with very little repercussions, I guess, like morally speaking.
Okay, because the thing there would be we even after sentient, even after 20 weeks, um, let's say you and I or we both agree, yeah, she has to stay pregnant. She's still going to get that medical bill. She's still going to her body's going to go through serious changes because I think she has about 20 more weeks to go. And those benefits would still, I'm sorry, those, you can say things that would come, such as medical bills, her body changes, is still going to go through that even after that person exists within her womb. Because I think even if that person does exist and we were to inject her with where let's say the fetus would not suffer at all, there's no suffering there. We would just be depriving, you can say, that life from a tiny bit of experience once they're sentient. Let's say, I'm sorry, I can be sporadic sometimes.
Oh, it's okay.
But let's say a woman at 21 weeks or 20 weeks, right? Her unborn can be conscious to some minimum, some tiny minimum way. The benefits would still be for her.
Yeah, and I think I understand what you're saying. I wouldn't say that the benefits would still be of her, but there would the consequences, i.e., now that there's even just a little bit of human consciousness, the consequences are way too dire. Because I would consider that murder. Once there is something to be murdered, I would consider it murder. So the consequences would still be bad. I would also say with the example of somebody who's like 20 weeks, who has already kind of gone through those body changes, who is already, I'm not saying that it would be a good decision or like a smart decision to have an abortion at that moment, because again, they're already like halfway there. You know, they're already incurred all the consequences and a lot of the pains and stuff.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say it would be like the smartest decision to do, but I would say that it's morally permissible, even if they're 19 weeks pregnant, because the consequences aren't that bad yet. I would say like the moral consequences. Now, you probably might be able to convince me that like it wouldn't be within somebody's self-interest to have an abortion. That might be a consequence that I'm open to talking about, but I would say like morally and legally, you haven't convinced me yet, is what I would say.
Yeah. So I think the consciousness, like for example, right? Now I know you would say that the unborn at 19 weeks, let's say they're not conscious yet. They're a week from there, and a woman's pregnant, and I'm sure you maybe heard this hypothetical, and she's attacked and she loses her pregnancy. That was that unborn, well, that 19-week fetus was not a person in your eyes, and that fetus itself was not harmed. Would you say?
I would say
Because
from
I
the
know you can.
perspective of the fetus, it wouldn't be harmed. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I would answer that is that you still deprive that human being their life, and that would still be harming the fetus itself. Like where that killer that killed that human would still be in the wrong for doing that to that being.
Yeah, I actually agree with this notion. This gets a little bit more complicated because this is like where the perspective shift happens. Like this is very foundational to I guess like what I think and how I view these things. So I'll try to explain this distinction, but it gets pretty foundational. I would say like first of all, you would consider this a loss of property, which is always wrong. Like you're not allowed to destroy something that I own or something that I have. But the idea would be that it's still a loss because think about it from like the father's perspective. So if you like, they'll talk about this with double homicide. Like if I kill a pregnant woman, I kill two people.
Yeah.
Because that father lost his wife and the son that he was going to have. Now, is that considered murder? That gets a little weird because again, the fetus wasn't there to experience murder, but that father certainly lost something that he was expecting to have. And I don't dislike people comparing that to murder. That's essentially the same thing. The difference between having an abortion though is that nobody is getting something taken from them. Like the mother is willingly choosing to take something. Hopefully the father agrees, something like that. So nobody is getting something taken from them because the child isn't getting taken. The child's life isn't getting taken from them. There's nothing there to be stolen. However, the father and the mother do have that child's life that is getting taken from them. So I do still condone that it's murder, double homicide. Some people would want to change it to just destruction of property. Like, I guess what I would say is like, let's say a mother who is pregnant was walking to the abortion clinic and then a guy beat her up and caused her to have a miscarriage. I don't know if we would consider that murder because that mother was going to do it anyway. You know what I mean? Like it's the consequences of these things. That's very shaky legal ground. Like that's not going to fly in court, but like morally, that's kind of how I view these things.
The only thing there is even if the mother wanted to, like for example, I would say you no matter who would be killing that unborn, and they're not a person, right? Under your view, is how would you say we charge the murder charge to that 19-week if they're not a person?
Well, in the case of like causing a miscarriage or double homicide, I'm okay with it being considered double homicide now. Maybe I'm missing your question. I'm okay with it being considered double homicide now because to me it's a fundamentally different thing than an abortion. I would consider it a double homicide from the husband's perspective or from the mom's perspective, something like that, but not from the baby's perspective, not from the fetus's perspective.
Okay. But at 20 weeks, then how would that be from, like, let's say the baby's perspective? Like, I mean, like, how from 19, like, so 19 weeks, that's not a person. This is how I would view it. At 19 weeks, that's not a person. So we can't murder non-persons, I would argue. Like, if this, well, I would say we can only murder human beings, but that that is not a person at 19 weeks. So if the mother was on the way to the abortion clinic, that person, that being at 19 weeks itself, I would say would be harmed in the sense of that is murder. Like, I would simply say, no matter if they're conscious or not, when that murder would qualify because you deprive this human being their, I would say, right to life, but you deprive that human being, no matter if the mom did it or the abortion doctor did it or the guy who attacked her did it. I think it would still all be considered double homicide. That's the way I would put it.
Yeah, I guess I'll challenge you on that. What is being deprived of its life? Like, I don't think a tree can't be deprived of its life. You know what I mean? Because there's nothing there to experience deprivation. So I guess, like, at 19 weeks or before this point of consciousness, what is being deprived of life?
Yeah, so I would say it's depriving. Well, it's actually depriving their life because you're actually killing them. Now, you're interfering with their natural developmental stage that would still be killing and stopping their life. So I would say it would be actually stopping that human being's life, even if they're not meeting the title of a person yet. So I think when you stop, like, if you kill anyone at any time, you stop their life. I mean, again, I believe in that itself. Killing is not necessarily wrong, but when there could be justified harm, I would argue.
Do you agree with me about the brain dead person? Do you think we're morally allowed to pull the plug on that person who will be brain dead forever?
Yes, I do. And I actually did. Thank you for bringing that up. I did want to address that because I think it's fundamentally different on so many levels. Because one, when we exist right after fertilization within the womb, it's a natural state of our existence and development where more likely, if she has a miscarriage, we don't know, that human being is going to hit their life cycles and develop more and more. As for the brain dead person, we use the word dead. And I think dead can be referred to in different ways, such as a miscarriage is dead, stillborn is dead, and brain dead is dead, right? So I think we measure death differently. But in that case of pulling the plug, is what you're doing is we're realizing there's a medical problem where we are a tragic thing happened. Let's say something happened where they're brain dead, and there's never going to be a comeback from that. And I'm sure we all acknowledge that. Now, like, pregnancy is just a natural course that you and I and all human beings go through, where if no one interfered with us, we would continue on living. Unless someone, I mean, maybe if, like, my mom was pregnant, someone attacked her, I could have been killed. Now, when I say I, obviously, I know that goes in different levels of who I am, right? Like self-identity. So I think when I hear comparisons to that brain dead person, I think it's fundamentally different on many levels, where I do agree we can pull the plug because we do know there's a tragedy, and that we aren't directly, you can say, killing that human. Something caused them to be in that state where they're already dead. where I think even their body essentially decays, even if they're on life support.
Well, yeah, and I agree with all of that, but the point of the comparison isn't to say that these two things are the same. I guess the point of the comparison is to point at what exactly are we valuing. So from my perspective and from your perspective too, a fetus is having the exact same conscious experience as a brain dead person up until 20 weeks. There are differences on why we're allowed to kill them, but what I'm saying is you also value that conscious experience. You don't just value life. Now,
Yes.
I'm going to be a little bit more lenient though. You value life plus a development, like a future development of this capacity for consciousness. Like you value life, but you also value life while it's able to develop into something that we might be able to value more later, which I agree with you too, but I guess why is it more wrong to have an abortion before that capacity for consciousness than it is to not? Like, I understand that it would be bad to stop something. Excuse me. I understand that it would be bad to stop something from being able to develop a capacity for consciousness. Why is that worse than 9 months of pregnancy, forcing women to have birth, stuff like this? Like, why is that worse?
Yeah. So worse. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Why is it worse to pull? I'm sorry.
Oh, so why is
worse?
it worse to have an abortion before 20 weeks than it is to I guess technically force a mother to keep that child and to keep, developing it in the womb? Why is it worse to have an abortion when nothing is there to experience the harms? The only thing we're losing is a potential for somebody that nobody will actually get to experience.
A few things. So I think it's more harmful is because I would say again, you're directly killing this human being, where they would have a right to exist within the womb and develop, and you're hindering, let's say, their development, by killing, or there's other examples I can give by hindrance. But that is why I think it's worse to interfere with their natural state, and you're directly and intentionally killing your essentially your biological child. Unlike the brain dead person, I think it wouldn't be. I'm sorry. Was the question why is that worse?
Yeah, why is an abortion? Why is committing an abortion before 20 weeks worse than forcing a mother to commit to pregnancy? But all those things that you're saying apply to the brain dead person. The only distinction, though, is that a fetus will become something. It will become something that we start to value, but it's not currently yet. So I'm not picking up why it would be worse to have an abortion.
So I think so. I do value consciousness. I think there's absolutely. So I do want to make that clear that consciousness is something that I just ignore. It's very important. But I would say I do value our human existence, right? So we develop and we gain these traits. Now, what I even value is, I would say, even a level of consciousness, even level of sentience, where I do value that within our human existence. Now, because how can I say this? If even though I acknowledge and I value these things, these traits as we develop, it still to me wouldn't give the right to interfere with those developmental stage unjustly and kill that human.
Well, I'll attack you a little bit on that word unjustly, because to me it is unjustified, or it is justified. And that, like, from the perspective of the fetus, it is nothingness. It is you're dead. And then abortion happens, you continue to be dead. Nothing has changed. There's no experience there that is being harmed. But the benefits of that are like, now, add infinite benefits of having an abortion, like you just avoided millions of dollars, a ton of responsibility that you weren't ready for, permanent body changes. So to me, it does seem justified because there's nothing there to experience. There's no harms being experienced by anybody in particular.
Okay, so the things you mentioned, right? Like the like the bills, the financial, that can still apply after the sentience, right? I mean, after the consciousness. So the like if a woman, like I know we went over this, if the woman went to have an abortion at 21 weeks, it would still benefit her, right? Like now, even if you were to say, hey, we have this in this solution, you can inject the fetus, feels zero pain. It would still be beneficial to the woman. Now, the harm, I think, where I'm starting to like get confused on is what exactly by harm? Because I know you said like pain was a factor, but the experience itself, what would be, would you say that qualifies as murder just because they're able to perceive or able to have some type of experience?
Yeah, and well, and I wouldn't even make a qualification on whether or not it's murder. I would just say that now when you're making an abortion, now the harms have or the pros and cons of an abortion have severely shifted. So now that it has a capacity for consciousness, now there is something that is experiencing its life being robbed from it. Like literally experiencing it, as in it has the parts to experience the pain. It has the temporal connections. I mean, this is getting into like philosophical territory, but you have like Kant's transcendental idealism. You know what I mean? Like all of these things that are able to form in a soul, in a person, start at this moment. And so now the harms are so much higher than the benefits of an abortion. But before that, like I said, it would be death, nothing. Abortion, continued, death, continued, nothing. So it's not that the benefits of abortion never change. They're always the same. But the harms of abortion severely change at a very particular moment during development.
I think so. I do understand what you're saying is like the levels of harm, correct? Like you do agree there's levels of harm.
Yeah, and I would say that, and I would really want to keep this on a scale because what I'm saying doesn't necessarily apply to like if I murdered you. Like there's a whole different set of circumstances because the pros of me murdering you become different. But in abortion, the pros of an abortion are the same the whole time. It's just there are infinitely more harms added once it develops a conscious experience because now there's a third party, which is the fetus. There's like another party being involved that you have to consider when having an abortion at 20 weeks.
Yeah, and I think we're not. I mean, obviously, we're not agreeing on, but like I think this goes back to where I would still believe that it's harm, right? Because you're depriving that human their life,
Well, you
and
aren't depriving it because there's nothing there to experience the deprivation. The world or the universe might be experiencing that harm, but you can't deprive a tree of its life. I mean, like even right now, you're depriving, like every time you masturbate or something, you're depriving the life of millions of children. You know what I mean? So there's nothing there to experience the deprivation of life.
Well, the only thing there is, I mean, again, like these comparisons, like I would say the potential of a like sperm would be what is needed to create a biological human. So like sperm dies, it's human and it's alive, right? When let's say I'm doing my thing. Um, so, but when, after fertilization, I do believe in that. Well, it's not, I mean, we agree that that is a biological human that does exist. So once that human being does exist, you are depriving them of their life. And when I mean of their life, it's simply them biologically existing and developing. And when you hinder that or interfere with that, you actually did deprive them of life. Now, I do understand that each stage of development, we develop more like, let's say, in sentience consciousness, we have that trait that develops within our brain. But like, I hope I don't sound repetitive, but when if a woman was to go at 20 weeks, I know you would say depriving that human their life. But what is essentially wrong with that? If she chose, like, for example, she determines that's not a person because she determines personhood different. So to her, that's not a person, right? And then she goes and has this unborn killed in a way where it causes no pain. Now, I know you might say it's going to deprive them of some type of experience, but what experience exactly at the earliest stages would make that wrong to deprive them of that?
I mean, this is getting into a little bit more of, I guess, neuroscience and biology than I think I'm prepared for. But the idea is that whatever, well, I guess just first off, all all people value a capacity to deploy consciousness as
Yeah.
everybody values that. So there's no woman that could like decide that personhood begins past this point. She doesn't agree with that, whether she might logically think that that's the case or not. She doesn't agree with that. And then we're allowed to legally rule over that kind of situation. And that, like, I would be totally okay with the law supporting no abortions past 20 weeks. So I couldn't foresee a person, but you're asking, like, what is there to experience harms, or like what harms exactly are happening? That gets into a little bit specific, but to me, the difference is like a tree isn't experiencing its life being robbed from it when we cut it down, because a tree does not have a capacity to deploy a conscious experience. Um, a fetus at 20 weeks, when it develops those brain parts, I mean, there might be like sensory things happening, like it's feeling things and it's like culminating it into like a memory bank. I guess like the idea of consciousness is one of the most highly convoluted, like terms. It's like it's a combination of like memory, feeling, logic. I mean, I'm just hoping that whatever you think consciousness is, we can just go from there. But the idea, though, is before that, I mean, you would even agree there's nothing there to experience any of the harms of it getting robbed from it before 20 weeks. However, it will have that, but it doesn't yet. And you agree with that.
Yeah. So I do acknowledge, so like in the neurological sense, like that there's no capacity, there's no they cannot experience if there's no pain receptors, right, that are developed, there's no pain being experienced. So if that makes sense. So that that harm of pain wouldn't be there, meaning a trait of feeling pain. Now, I still believe, though I do agree there's different levels and I mean different categories of what is harmful. I would still consider it harmful to kill before 20. I mean, to kill them at all. I still believe in that's harmful, even if they didn't have sentience.
Well, you're killing a brain dead person. You're killing them in the exact same way you're killing a fetus, but the fetus will grow and it will become this. But why are you valuing the fact that it will grow more than the current alive person who you're forcing to give birth, I guess? So like, why are you valuing their ability to grow these things more than the current person?
So I would say I'll say human being and person is going to be the same for me, like from my view. So I would still say that that person still exists from conception until birth, even after birth. But you and I both agree that even if there was, like I said, after 20 weeks, there is more of a person, more of a woman that has full consciousness, a level of consciousness. And when I say consciousness, self-awareness, and let's say more importance, more a fully developed human, which is that woman hosting that child. Now, I still would say that you don't, I would view it as harm, if that makes sense. Like it was still harmful. There's levels of harm, but we would both essentially believe in forcing a woman to stay pregnant and go through this harmful experience if she changed her mind at 20 weeks. Now I know it's rare, but I think in that case, that position still is going to cause harm. And I think you would agree that it would be just harm to do to that woman, making her stay pregnant even after 20 weeks.
Yeah, I guess when I'm getting my scale out and I'm seeing the benefits of abortion and the cons of abortion, I don't know why I'm just unable to agree with you that this harm that you're talking about that cannot be experienced by anything outweighs the benefits of abortion. Like, I get that it is a human, but you and me agree that we can kill humans under certain qualifications. I guess I just don't see why this qualification of something being able to grow is enough to outweigh the benefits of an abortion. I do not share this conception of harms of an abortion that you do. Like, what there's nothing wrong. I would make the concession there's nothing wrong happening when an abortion happens before 20 weeks because there's nothing there to experience any of the harms. And even though we end a life, even though something was going to be there and now it isn't, nobody, even us, experience the negative consequences of that. We don't even experience the fact that there was supposed to be a person here, whether it's good or bad. We don't even get to experience that. So there's just no harms that I would even consider to outweigh the benefits of having an abortion before 20 weeks. I just feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah, so I understand you don't view it as harm, and you and I have different like perspectives.
I don't think. Why do you view it as harm?
Yeah, I would view it as harm because again, you're depriving a human being of their life based off a subjective view that they're not a person yet.
We do that with the brain dead person. What you just said, we do that with the brain dead.
Not at all, because that brain dead person is a dead person.
It's alive.
The state they're in is we would recognize the state that they're in is dead. Like, for example, a miscarriage is also referring to death, but they never had a brain, right? They're not brain dead, so we couldn't say brain dead, but it's still a form of death. That's why I think it is fundamentally, again, on many levels different, where you're pulling the plug on someone that's on let's say a medical problem. Now,
a brain dead person is equally alive to a fetus before 20 weeks. There's no value judgment there. They're both the exact same amount of alive, the brain dead person and the fetus.
Well, I would say it's not same exact alive, because again, I was never brain dead, right? You were never brain dead, but you were alive as a zygote embryo fetus.
Well, I would.
So like we are different. Obviously, I think it would be fundamentally different.
Well, I guess let's not use the word brain death. Let's just say their brain isn't working so that they can never deploy a conscious experience again. That is what a fetus is at. So you were in the exact same capacity as a brain dead person for the first 20 weeks of you in your mother's womb. You were at the exact same livelihood as the brain dead person. The only difference is potential. It's the only difference.
Well, I would say that wouldn't be true, because if that was the case, and I understand that, because of course I didn't have a brain, right? We developed that later on, and more of a formed brain. But that brain dead person, I can't see how it correlates where there's that human, and I would say dead, right? Because the only way I can view that human is dead. And just like a miscarriage, again, that is also dead. Even if that miscarriage, the unborn, let's say, I think miscarriages happen early for the most part, is even if they never did have developed that brain, there still would be considered dead. Now, I know, like, you would say it's exactly the same in the sense of like there's no consciousness, but is that fair to say?
Well, I think that's somewhat of a language game. Like a company can die, you know what I mean? But that's not the same. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I would say that a miscarriage before 20 weeks is a fundamentally different kind of death than actually just like us dying. It's a different kind of death, as in nothing is experiencing the death, but we are experiencing the loss of what would have been. Which again, and even when you say that a brain dead person, you're speaking to like the tautology of the word death, but you're alluding to what I'm talking about. A brain dead person is not actually dead. All of their parts are functioning to create an alive body. We're just missing the capacity to deploy a conscious experience. And so to me, a fetus is and to you, sorry, to both of us, the fetus is in that exact same state. All of its parts are working to create an alive experience. In fact, the thing is alive at conception. However, we're missing the secret sauce, something that's so important, something that's necessary and sufficient. Like if we took that thing out, it would no longer be a human, and that thing isn't there until 20 weeks.
Well, here's the thing is, so I do agree again, consciousness is very important, but I would say there's a lot of levels of our development where we care, where we have, you can say, being rational, or, you know what I mean? There's so many levels we would need to meet neurologically where we, like, for example, where we have this conversation, where we question ourselves, or where we're having a self-awareness. Self-awareness, I would say, is such as passing the mirror test, having a consciousness that there's a wall behind me, or I have a date tonight, right? So like I would say levels of consciousness do matter, and we value all of that. For example, if let's say there's this thing that are, let's say us as humans never develop past being born a baby, we would have no cares of anything moral. We would have no philosophical views. So I agree, we do care about consciousness, but I would also say we also would agree that we have to physically exist and meet our levels, our milestones of development, even way beyond birth, where I don't believe, because we put this subjective view of you don't qualify as a person, someone can kill you. And I think that's the crux of a problem I have with the pro-choice position, because especially the personhood, like I said, is very broad. And I understand what you're saying. And I think what you're saying is very, probably the more popular of views. But I've also, and I'm not trying to like divert, but vegans are very consistent with, let's say, the sentience claim or the consciousness, right? But if I can ask, would you say something that never deploys consciousness, that thing itself cannot be wronged?
Yes, in the same way that like a tree can't be harmed, because it's not able to experience harm. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of loaded terms that happen. Like experience. The verb experience is something that can only happen when there's some sort of thing to experience it.
And is it okay if I run a reductio on you?
That's
just
fine.
So, okay. Just so, because I think you would care, or maybe, I don't know. Let me just run it. So some humans, it's rare, I think, where they're born with, I think it's called anencephaly. The condition is where they don't have their brain. They'll never have consciousness. They'll never have that experience. If someone was to do, I'm sure, horrible things to that living human baby, would you agree that nothing is wronged to that baby itself? Because they have no consciousness, they'll never develop consciousness, but they're born, they're living human, they're living, and they don't live for long, these humans. But I forgot the longest case, but you would agree that human couldn't be harmed.
From the perspective of that human, yeah, in the same way that like a dead or a brain dead person is existing. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are negative implications of doing bad things to dead bodies. You know what I mean? Even though, so like, I wouldn't say that it's like morally okay. It probably says something really terrible about you if you do terrible things to that. In the same way that like mutilating a dead body would be. So I would equate that to mutilating a dead body if it is the way that you describe. I'm not familiar with the neurology of that disease though.
Yeah, like so I would still say you're harming that being, even if they can experience or have any capability to experience. I would still say that that being has worth or value. Where you
I would say that
that
I would say it has value too, but why can't you harm a tree?
well, I think you can harm a tree. So I do agree you can harm a tree, but the harm's going to be different. So like if you kill anything that's alive, you're still harming that thing, but it would not be in the sense of where I give trees that value, or that tree wouldn't have that value. But you're still harming. Don't get me wrong. I think there's different types of harm. Just like, for example, killing animals that we eat for food. Some are conscious, right? And many are sentient. We cause pain and suffering, and we cause them harm. So, I mean, there's many forms of harm.
Yeah, I think this is maybe a bug of just language in general, but like you have to know, I guess, what I'm referring to when I ask that question. Like, can a block of concrete be harmed? That's like, that question already is like a really weird, because it's like, yeah, I could like damage a block of concrete. I can get how it's supposed to be and make it slightly less able to do what it's supposed to do, and you could consider that harm. But like a block of concrete is unable to experience harm. There's, from the perspective of the block of concrete, it is nothingness and then continued nothingness. Same with a tree. It is nothingness and then continued nothingness. Same with a brain dead person. It is nothing and then it is continued nothingness. Same with the diseased fetus that you were just talking about. It is nothingness and then it is continued nothingness. Now, we might harm it in that it is able to perform its function worse off than it is, but that's like kind of a sneaky way, I guess, of like describing what harm is. And if it's not even sneaky, you'd have to figure out like, what are you comparing this to? So like, there is harm to a tree, but the benefits of us cutting down the tree severely outweigh the harms experienced by the tree. I would say that is the same with an abortion.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I could not agree with that, but
why? I guess what's stopping you?
Yeah, again, because I'm saying, I would say you're depriving this human, and it's still harm, and it's not harm where you're causing them suffering. This human as a zygote embryo fetus, you're not causing them harm in the sense you would describe it as causing them pain, but it's harming them because you're depriving them their life and their existence essentially. Now, I don't see it as being justified.
Yeah, I think we might be running the circle, and I know that you had said that you only have an hour. I guess I'll say my closing thoughts, and then I'll give you an opportunity to say some closing thoughts too. I would say that like it is impossible for me to harm Michael Jackson right now because he's dead and he's not here. There's nothing there to be harmed. Now, I understand that there is an intuitive notion that preventing something from ever existing has negative consequences. But I think when you look at abortion as a whole, you should be able to see the consequences of an abortion, this negative consequences of preventing something from existing, and then to compare that to the positives of what are the positives of having it, and then to have your moral weight happen there. I would also try not to rely on something so fundamental that is like, I cannot hurt a human because it's a human. You need some sort of justification as to why you aren't allowed to harm a human because it's a human. For justification, I would point to the example of the brain dead person. What gives us the justification to harm a brain dead person? What is the harms happened when you harm a brain dead person? What is experienced? What are the positives? What are the negatives? Hopefully it's intuitively obvious to you why you can do that. Take some of that and then apply it to an abortion beforehand. Are you really trying to hang on to this nebulous concept of like a person or a human and valuing it as that? And then what exactly do you think is happening when an abortion is being had? So I would encourage you to think about that. And then if people have made it this far, I would encourage them to think about that and like really just try to grasp like the harms and the benefits and then really make an educated decision on like what's happening there.
Okay.
And then I would give you an opportunity to kind of, I guess, wrap us up with some closing thoughts. Unless you have more time, we probably want to wrap up within the next like 15 minutes. But I know that you said you had about like an hour.
Yeah. That's fine. I can give like my closing statement, I guess, or like a few, few statements. So yeah, my issue here with the whole idea of personhood is it's a subjective view. And I would suggest people to look inside, like such as Peter Singer. He makes arguments of when a person exists, that's months after birth because they must develop certain traits. People take personhood to be slowly gained in the sense of having traits that meets the qualifier of having moral worth. I think when we allow this, and what we see around the world is we devalue groups of human beings and we kill them by the millions based off a subjective view of who's a person and who's not. And it can be based off size, level of development, environment, and things of that nature. That's why I think it's an issue when we discriminate against a group of humans. Now, I also would like to add that we do have different views of harm, and I agree there can be different levels of harm. And I would also, if are people watching this? I'm sorry.
No, not right now. But I would theoretically post this on my channel, unless the audio is so bad that it's just unusable. I would post this to my channel.
Okay. Yeah. So like that's pretty much. I do believe in that. Once a biological human does exist, a woman does have an obligation to nurture instead of harm her child. And by that sense, harm meaning depriving them the right to life, or let's say interfering with their development. That's a other discussion. But yeah, I mean, thank you for this conversation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chris. Like I said, I've never had an invitation like this before. I thought it was really exciting, and I thought you were, just incredibly respectful, well-spoken. You engaged incredibly well. Not that this, I guess, is shocking to me, but when people challenge you to a debate, sometimes you expect the worst. So I was just very pleasantly surprised that good faith conversation is not dead.
Yeah, for sure. I wish I had more time to properly prepare. I was on my way home from work, and I honestly thought I remembered last week. Then I got busy, and when I got the email, I was almost going to cancel and be like, "All right," but I was like, "All right, I gotta try to do this."
No problem. No problem. I got some cool. Abortion has been my hyper fixation for probably the last year or so. And I just finished creating this video essay that kind of goes through the groundwork of like beginning to end. I'll send it to you before it releases. I would love to hear your thoughts from like a pro-life perspective to see like what I'm missing or something like that. I think that would be really interesting too. So
one more question. Who do you, I think, favor, like for pro-choice philosophy? Like, is there someone that you, I guess, favor their position? Anyone?
I wouldn't say it's like traditional philosophers. I used to be pro-life, and then I used to listen to arguments and debates from, you're like Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, the classic politicians, right? It's very rarely been from a philosophical lens. It's been mostly from a political lens. And then I heard an argument from this streamer named Destiny. I don't know if you're familiar with this guy. I pretty much parrot his exact argument because for the first time ever, I'd listened to a debate with a pro-choice person, Destiny, and then these two women who are of the pro-life position. And it was
Rose.
Yes, it was the worst pro-life performance I've ever seen in my whole life. And it opened my eyes to the other argument, which I'd never really considered as deeply, I guess, as I do now.
So if you ever get a chance, did you watch him debate Trent Horn?
Yes, and that was really good too. Trent Horn is the one who alluded me to the distinction of a harm experienced by somebody and a harm experienced by nobody. I always make this distinction of, but a harm experienced by nobody, but is still a harm. He used this awesome example where he said, imagine that a child were to receive $1 million when it's born, and then right before it's born, it's stolen, but nobody has any idea that child is still harmed. That's just a really good example of a universal harm. That I think he really opens up the conversation for that I think is really interesting.
There's there's a lot of people I want to look into, but I kind of briefly look into philosophers on pro-choice and then slash pro-life. There is a pro-life philosopher named Alexander Proust. I heard his stuff's really interesting. I think he has a book called I Was Once a Fetus. And then, there's a lot. I think Frank Beckwith, he uses the substance view. So this is stuff I do need to really look into. Same with the flow. I don't know if you heard of the flow. That's Marquise. He's pro-life argument, but he comes from a position called a future like ours. But how do you view people like Peter Singer? Have you?
I don't know his views on abortion, or how those apply. I wouldn't say I've thought a lot about the issue, and because I have the unique perspective of being pro-life and then now being pro-choice, I know a lot about how the conversation goes. But when it comes to describing philosophically a person's view, I'm not well versed in the different views of, I guess, different people.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff. I still have a lot to learn, and dude, I appreciate it, and I'll give it some thought. Which you said, I've heard that position again, but I'll give it thought more deeply. So
sure. No, and I really appreciate the conversation, and again, the cordiality. I just really appreciate your attitude, I guess. You seem like a very curious and genuinely curious person, which I think is probably the most valuable thing you could have for somebody who's going to engage in conversation like this. So
yeah, for sure, man. All right, you have a good night.
All right, I'll see you, Chris. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
All right.